In the golden days of old New Orleans, where carriages clattered along cobblestone streets and the scent of magnolia mingled with river mist, there existed a woman who would come to define evil for generations. Her name was Marie Delphine McCarty, though history would remember her by the darker name she bore in infamy, Madame LaLaurie. Born on March 19, 1787, into the McCarty family, Delphine was the child of wealth and tradition. Her family traced their lineage to early French and Spanish settlers of Louisiana, and they were deeply entrenched in the elite Creole society that ruled New Orleans with manners and money. They were slave owners, as most families of their stature were, but the McCartys were said to be particularly brutal, even in a brutal system. Delphine grew up in a world of ornate ballrooms and lace-veiled secrets. Her mother was known for her strict discipline, and her father, a former officer in the Spanish military, was cold, controlling, and distant. Whispers followed Delphine even as a young girl. It was said she would wander away during garden parties, slipping into the slave quarters to watch the servants, her gaze curiously detached, like someone studying insects beneath glass. Some claim they saw her smile when a slave child cried. At age 14, Delphine married Don Ramón de López y Angulo, a prominent Spanish officer. The match was arranged and politically advantageous. They traveled to Spain, where Don Ramón died suddenly, some say of illness, others of a fall. But the rumor that lingered in the alleys of New Orleans was that he died screaming, and that Delphine watched without blinking. She returned to New Orleans a widow, young and rich, her beauty untouched by grief. Suitors swarmed. She chose Jean Blanc, a successful banker and politician, who built her a lavish home and fathered 4 of her children. Their marriage lasted until his death, another sudden passing, again without clear explanation. Delphine was a widow twice over before the age of 30. Still, her fortune grew, as did her reputation for poise and charm. She was known to be fiercely proud, exacting in etiquette, and deeply concerned with appearances. But beneath the veil of civility, something was brewing, something cold and ancient that pulls behind her soft eyes. In 1825, she married her third and final husband, Dr. Leonard Louis Nicholas LaLaurie. He was much younger, handsome, and possessed of a temper. Their union was contentious, frequent arguments spilled out onto their balconies. Yet together, they bought the now infamous property at 1140 Royal Street, a towering mansion with thick walls and shuttered windows that always seemed just a bit too quiet. It was in that house that the devil made his home. To the public, Madame LaLaurie was the epitome of Southern grace. She hosted elegant balls, entertained governors and aristocrats, and carried herself with an aristocratic aloofness that captivated many. But behind the grand chandeliers and gilded mirrors, her slaves suffered unspeakable torments. Neighbors grew suspicious. They noticed how her enslaved servants rarely stayed long. One day they were there, the next they were gone. Delphine was seen chasing a young girl through the house, whip in hand. The child leapt from the rooftop rather than face her mistress's wrath. Her body was found twisted in the courtyard below. Delphine was fined for her cruelty, but no one truly held her accountable. She simply bought more slaves. Many of them came from auctions known for selling the damaged, those who had tried to run or who bore the marks of other brutal masters. Perhaps she preferred them that way, broken already. It was the fire that finally revealed the horror. In April of 1834, smoke began to billow from the LaLaurie mansion. A fire had broken out in the kitchen. Firefighters broke down doors and stormed the halls. What they discovered in the attic turned stomachs and froze hearts. From the outside, the LaLaurie mansion was a marvel, 3 stories of Creole elegance on Royal Street, its wrought iron balconies wrapped in jasmine and ivy. The walls were painted a genteel white, the shutters a dignified shade of slate. It was a home meant for eyes, built to impress, to dazzle, to conceal. But behind its stately facade, the mansion was a labyrinth. The rear of the property housed the enslaved quarters, built out of view from the main parlor windows. These quarters, already grim, led up a narrow staircase to the attic, a space most guests were never allowed to see. The staircase twisted like a spine, and those who ascended it did so at their peril. It was in this attic that Madame LaLaurie became something far darker than a cruel mistress. It was here she became a monster. The attic was sealed from light. It was windowless and suffocating, the air thick with the scent of blood, sweat, and rot. It was said to be lined with crude wooden operating tables, iron restraints bolted to the walls, and chains that clinked like wind chimes in the silence. Some of the surviving witnesses who discovered it spoke of cages barely large enough to hold a dog, yet humans were stuffed inside them, their bones twisted and broken to fit. One man, half mad from the ordeal, had been in a standing cage so narrow that when he passed out, his own weight dislocated his shoulders. Buckets filled with bile and gore were scattered across the floor. Human limbs, some rotting, some preserved in strange chemicals, were stacked in corners like butcher scraps. The tools they found there were not the instruments of a physician, but those of a torturer: bone saws, hooks, branding irons, crude needles, iron masks designed to muffle screams. The walls were scratched. Names were etched into the wood by fingernails and blood. Prayers in broken French. One read, "Je suis encore vivant, I am still alive." The cook who started the fire had been chained to the stove for days before she dared to defy her mistress. She confessed that no slave brought into that attic ever came out the same if they came out at all. She heard them at night, pleading in broken voices, begging for death. She set the house ablaze, not to escape, but to draw the city's eyes to what no one dared to see. The LaLaurie slaves were not just laborers, they were human experiments, prisoners of a woman who seemed to derive perverse pleasure from playing God with their bodies and minds. One woman was found with deep circular scars covering her body in symmetrical patterns, evidence of being used as a human pincushion. Another had strips of skin peeled off her back, revealing raw muscle in deliberate rows, as if Madame had attempted to create a grotesque human tapestry. A man was found with a hole bored into his skull, his brain visibly exposed, with a wooden stick left nearby, implying she had tried to stir his thoughts. Others had their mouths sewn shut and were force-fed a disgusting mash of spoiled food and insects. Some were blind, others deafened by hot irons. Worst of all were those still breathing. 7 were found alive in the attic the day the house burned. Most were beyond recognition, emaciated, their eyes sunken, their limbs twisted like tree roots. They had been kept alive through force feeding and sadistic surgery. Many could not speak. The trauma was so profound that some reportedly never spoke again, even after being freed. And yet, they were the lucky ones. In the courtyard, investigators found shallow graves, dozens of them. The remains were of men, women, and children. Some were decapitated, others dismembered. All bore the same signs of prolonged suffering. What Madame LaLaurie inflicted was not punishment. It was not discipline. It was artless horror, torture for curiosity, cruelty for entertainment. When the crowd descended upon the mansion after the fire, they did not come to gawk, they came to destroy. They ransacked the house, tore down its balconies, shattered its windows. But Madame LaLaurie was gone. She had escaped in the chaos, slipping through the mob like a serpent into the grass. Some say she went to Lake Pontchartrain and boarded a ship to France. Others say she was hidden by powerful friends, protected by her family's name. A letter found years later in Paris claims she had died there in 1849, buried quietly in Montmartre under an assumed name. But her body was never returned, and her grave, if it exists, was never marked. But New Orleans never forgot. To this day, locals refuse to walk on the same side of the street as the LaLaurie mansion. Tenants who have tried to live there report screaming at night, chains clinking, and the overwhelming smell of blood. One man swore he saw a figure in a high-necked dress standing at the window, her face pale, her hands red to the wrist. Tour guides don't embellish this house, they lower their voices when they reach it. The walls have absorbed too much sorrow. And in the dead stillness of the French Quarter, when the air goes cold for no reason, it is said that you can hear it again, the groan of chains, the hush of breathless terror, and the faintest sound of a lullaby sung in a soft, elegant voice. In a time when slavery was entrenched in the very foundation of American society, legal, normalized, and tragically accepted, what does it say when a woman's treatment of her slaves was considered too brutal even by slave-owning standards? It says that Madame LaLaurie was not merely cruel. She was unnatural. When the fire revealed her secret chamber of horrors, it wasn't just the law or the local authorities that turned against her, it was New Orleans itself. The people, many of whom had once attended her parties, admired her fine gowns, or copied her Parisian hairstyles, now spat her name like a curse. First, rumors spread within hours of the fire being extinguished. Women gathered in salons to whisper through clenched fans, "Did you hear? They found a man up there, his mouth sewn shut, like a doll. They say she fed a little girl broken glass until her insides tore themselves apart." There were jars of human heads, and something else, something pickled, like it came from a baby. The gossip didn't stop at the facts. It grew, twisted, bloomed like fungus. Some said Madame LaLaurie was a witch who used voodoo magic to remain beautiful. Others claimed she bathed in blood like a new world, Countess Bethori. A few whispered that her husband, Dr. LaLaurie, was her accomplice, that the medical experiments were his twisted work, and she his enabler. Even the white elite, many of whom owned slaves themselves, recoiled. They had crossed many moral lines, but Madame LaLaurie had not just crossed them, she had obliterated them. Her actions were seen not as excessive punishment, but as the product of a diseased mind. Some townsfolk even suggested that her family had known all along and helped cover up her sadism. The McCarty name, once held in high regard, became tainted by her crimes. And as for her mansion, it became untouchable. No one wanted it. It sat in ruins for decades, uninhabited, rotting from within like a festering wound. Though Delphine escaped justice, her ghost never left. No grave bore her name in New Orleans. In time, she became a legend, but not the kind that inspires pride. Madame LaLaurie did not die with dignity. She dissolved into myth, buried under shame, whispered only in terror.